All righty, welcome back to American Builders. Today, I'm here with Chris George of Chris George Custom Homes. Chris, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start. We start everything with a background, but I'll kind of tee you up a little bit. This is a third generation company here in Kansas City. Been around since the 1950s, but give the audience an understanding of who you are and how your company came to be and how you came to kind of be the owner operator of it.
Yeah, so I'm Chris George the third, actually. So my grandpa was senior. He started Chris George Construction in the 50s, and he had 12 kids. So he, took all kinds of different jobs. He did some commercial, he did some a lot of residential, built new homes, but did a little bit of everything. There's still buildings in downtown Olathe that I know that my grandpa built. And so, a lot of his boys work for his company. I think some of the girls probably helped in the office too. But my dad ran framing crews for him for a long time, and or for a couple of years when he was very young. And then my grandpa owed him. So goes the story. My grandpa owed him some money, so he gave him a couple lots that he owned as payment. And then my dad went off, took those lots, and just went off on his own. And then my grandpa retired a few years later after my dad had, kind of had things humming and came to work for my dad. So we always say third generation. Technically, our LLC started in 1976 with my dad, Chris George Jr., going off on his own when he was 21. And then grandpa came to work for him. So, it's all been kind of a cohesive transition, but technically two different companies.
And when did you, obviously it's a family affair, did you always know you were going to come in and take this over? Walk me through some of the foundational stories of working in the business and kind of how you got to the point of where you are now as the co-owner and kind of the main operator.
Yeah, so I mean, we started working, my brother and I started working for the company when we were very young, probably 10 and 12. We started working like 3 days a week, half days, we always joked that it was glorified babysitting at that point. I don't know how productive we were those first couple summers, but we were in there sweeping houses out. We did all of our trash work internally back then. So we had a trash truck, and we would scrape houses out, pick up rough ends, just cleaning. We called them as the trash monkey position. And we did that for a long time. And then we moved into like the finish crew, started working on our finish crew and learning some light construction skills. Spent some time, my brother spent some time on a framing crew one summer. I laid sewer line all summer, so just kind of different stuff, different facets of the company that we worked in all through junior high, high school, college. And then my brother and I both went to St. Louis University. He's 2 years older than me. And when we graduated, we both just came to work for the company full time.
I mean, I think the foundation there is probably pretty key of getting started. You said 10, 12 years old. Now you have your kids coming into the fold. Talk a little bit about that because it seems like something you're passionate about of, you know, the work ethic that you can instill in young kids when you get started early and kind of how that's impacted your work ethic today. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was just like no matter what, you had to wake up and go to work, and it was like it wasn't something that my dad really talked about, but we just understood that was the expectation. Little things like when we were younger and we were getting a little bit older and we're kind of worried about what clothes we were wearing finally, you get to that age and you're like, oh, I want to wear, back then it was what Abercrombie and stuff like that. And what were some of those other ones? I don't know. I can't even remember some of those brands, but you wanted to pay more money for your clothes. Well, my parents were like, all right, if we're not going to buy, Walmart clothes for you, you're going to pay for half of those clothes. So when we go, whatever you spend, you got to pay it for half. And so it was just like we liked working because it gave us the opportunity to go buy baseball cards or nicer clothes or, whatever kind of stuff that we wanted to buy. And so I think just by learning that hey, you got to work for what you want. Again, wasn't really talked about as much as just kind of shown to us. And I think that that's something that, my brother and I want to make sure we instill in our kids.
Well, I think you made a great point there at the end. It's not necessarily that you have to talk about it. It's like you tell a kid to do something over and over again. The natural kid reaction is almost to like reject that. Whereas the proof by experience and, modeling by showing what you're doing probably has a much longer lasting impact. Let's dive in to the actual business now. Before we get into the specifics and all kind of the growth and operations questions, just give the audience an understanding of all the different services that you guys do. If I were to come and hire Chris George Custom Homes, what should I expect?
Yeah, so we have been around since 1976. We've built almost 3,000 homes. Used to be, my dad built the company on production building. So we would have a model in several different communities and build, 7 or 8 different floor plans at a time and just, really built a lot of homes. Some of these lists behind me are top 10 list of permits pulled in the city. And, we were always on that list for 20 plus years. So now our Caleb and I kind of over the last decade plus have changed really what we do as a whole. We have transitioned fully into for the last 12 or 13 years, really fully into, custom home building. So what that can look like, we do a lot of tear down rebuild in Northeast Johnson County, Old Leawood, Prairie Village, Fairway, Westwood. And we also do a lot of custom rural building. So someone's got 5, 10 acres in Lewisburg, or we're doing one in Cleveland, Missouri right now. So those ones can be really spread out. Um, but we just like that stuff. It's every job's unique. It's just a different took us a while to understand all the differences that go into those. My dad had always done some custom homes over the years, so we had experience in it, but it wasn't what we did fully until probably the last 8 or 9 years. We took a transition over, like I said, maybe the last 13 years. In the last 8 or 9, it's been like that's what we do. And so, it's taken a lot of company restructuring in some ways and stuff like that to really be perfectly set up for this. So it's been a bit of a transition over the years, but it's what we focused on, and it's what all of our kind of organizational change over that time has been directed towards.
We're going to get into the specifics of why you made that change and kind of the results of that. But first, let's talk about running a family business with your brother. I'm in the exact same scenario, quite literally. Me and my brother own a business together. How do you guys think about, and I'm sure there's a lot of other trades businesses and home builders out there who are in a similar, situation. How do you guys think about, splitting up the roles, owning your own areas? How have you guys worked together? And if you could just kind of provide some tips, feel free to speak directly to me if you'd like. But your tips for running a business with your family.
Well, who's older between you and your brother?
I'm the younger one.
Okay. Look at that. We got the younger brothers got on the
Let's go.
podcast.
Let's go.
We're the face guys for the
Let's
company. I think, Caleb and I are pretty lucky. We've spent our whole lives together. So even when we moved into a much larger house when we were like 14 years old with extra bedrooms, my dad kind of like Jedi mind tricked us. Well, I was 13, he was 15, and got us to share a bedroom. He was like, "Oh, you're gonna get this huge room if you guys share this room. If not, you're gonna have these tiny little rooms." And so, we've shared a room our whole lives. And then we went to college together. I mean, he 2 years ahead of me, went to the same college, went to St. Louis University, played rugby together in college, played football, played all same sports in high school. And, so it's like we've done everything together. We're very, very close. And we're kind of lucky because I feel like and we hear this from people too, like outside people or people we hire that once they're around for a while, like we kind of have a complementary skill set. So our lanes are somewhat naturally established. There's still a few things that we could probably, clarify a little bit better, but it doesn't ever really cause us any sort of issues. So yeah, we're lucky. I mean, we have like pretty clear lanes of like what we do. I do the majority of the sales and kind of, customer satisfaction is kind of my big thing. It's like not that Caleb's not interested in it, it's just like one of my big areas of focus. Caleb does a lot of stuff with the kind of SOPs and stuff for the field. We just hired a director of construction, so we're excited for that position to kind of take some ownership over that part. He deals with the lenders. I don't do a whole lot with that. He's more the development guy. And then I do a fair amount also with the field. Like I'm overseeing jobs. Like once they're signed, I'm still kind of overseeing them and making sure that the customers and our project managers are remaining aligned and, the customers are happy. So a lot of what I do is sales and customer oriented.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think having clearly defined roles is an important thing. Complementary roles is also super beneficial. And just from my experience, like a lot of people, when I tell them I work with my brother, they're like, "Oh, I could never do that." And it's like, okay, well, then you probably shouldn't. I mean,
Yeah.
if you can clearly identify that that's not a good idea, then wouldn't recommend it. But fortunately, it sounds like we both have pretty good relationships there. Let's talk now about that transition from going to the spec houses, focusing on big communities and kind of large scale to the specific custom home builds. What was the thought process behind why you made that change, and what has the result of that change been?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So my brother and I both moved right after college. We grew up out south we were on some land out here in South Lake. That's actually where I'm sitting now because this is where our company office is on this land. We moved into a house on 80 acres. Like I said, when I was about 12, 13, he was 14, 15. And so we had always kind of built out south and out west in Johnson County, and we build in communities and everything. And then we started kind of up the level of communities we were building in. So we were getting more experience building the higher end homes. We did that for 10 or 15 years. And then my brother and I moved to kind of Prairie Village area right after college. And we started to see a few homes get torn down. It's kind of before the gold rush era of that area of town, when everyone started tearing down houses over there. But we started to see a few of them go, and we were like, all right, this is interesting. So I kind of just took a proposal to my dad and, said, hey, here's what I think it looks like. Here's a house I'm looking at buying and trying it for the first time. And he was like, yeah, go ahead. So we started doing that. First one went well and just kind of kept going from there. And before we knew it, that's just what we were doing. We were doing a lot of tear down and rebuilds in Northeast Johnson County. And then conversely, we also got a couple really cool custom high-end rural build jobs out in like Lewisburg and Bucyrus and a couple other places back in the day. I managed those jobs. I project managed for 15 years or so, or 12 years or so. And it was like, you learned a lot from those jobs and I really enjoyed them. And so then we started doing a lot more of that. And that was just kind of a nice niche we've been in for, a long time now. And before we knew it, that was just kind of what we ended up doing a lot of. Now, in the last 5 years or so, since my dad's passed, since we've joined a coaching group and all this stuff and a builder group, it's been more intentional. All of our change has been a lot more intentional over the past 5 years. We were pretty good, I think, at enacting change before, but it's now just a lot more intentional and a lot more planned. Hey, here's what we're going to do in quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four, versus just, all right, what are we doing next? And so I think that's been a big change for us, for Caleb and I. And we've kind of made the full transition at this point, to where that's really all we're doing.
Let's talk about kind of the two buckets, tear down and then custom rural. So that first project you did, I guess we could just kind of focus on that. Walk me through that project. How different is the process of doing a tear down and rebuild versus what you were doing before versus the custom rural? And like what are the things that somebody going into it for the first time, like where you were when you bought that first house, what are the things that they should know going into that?
I'd say a couple things. Well, first of all, one clarity here, or one point of clarity that for me is we do still build in communities. Like if someone comes to us and they want to build in the community, like we still do a fair amount of that. There's a fair amount of that on our project sheet right now. And we still do some in-home communities or some in-community building on spec basis as well, but we don't have, 5 model homes and all that kind of stuff like we used to, because we've kind of moved over and changed what we do. And then the communities that we build in tend to be, kind of requisite to what we're building in the other product categories, because we found it's just hard back in the day. We kind of had our foot in like an entry level and then also higher end point, and it's hard to do both well. So we've intentionally made that transition. But I would say for it's kind of two different things. For the custom rural, it's all about site costs. So when you have like a plug and play subdivision, you know what your sewer is going to cost roughly. You know what your water and gas and electric are going to cost. It's pretty easy to put a number on those. I mean, yeah, you can run into rock, and there's some things in community and maybe peering that can certainly drive costs. But overall, your big picture and your utilities and excavations like pretty projectable. Whereas in a rural build, you might have a 400-foot driveway. You got a culvert at the driveway. You got a septic system. Is that going to be, a lateral septic system or some sort of a drip system or a mound system? And what do those cost? They're a lot more than a regular sewer hookup. I can tell you that. And then, you're going to have maybe 1,000-pound buried propane tank if you can't connect to gas, which a lot of rural lots you can't. So that's going to be, $9,000 instead of maybe a $2,000 gas hookup. So there's just all these things that can play into it and really drive costs on the custom rural that you wouldn't have when you're building, a house in a subdivision. Everything's kind of laid out for you. So there's a lot of hidden costs. People, before they buy land, I always tell them, talk to a builder. Make sure you can afford what you want on that piece of land before you pull the trigger and buy something. And same thing for the teardowns. I mean, people see the prices on these teardowns, and and they just keep going up, and they're more expensive per square foot than your in community building, and a lot of that is same thing. Sewer lines. We got to reline sewer lines to get the city to pass them. It didn't used to be that way, but the city kind of wised up, and they're like, all right, we can use these builders to update some of these mains and stuff, and that adds cost. So a sewer line, you might have to get into the street to connect to the sewer line. Now you're tearing up streets. So all these things, they're just different in the cities. Each city in Prairie Village, Leawood, all these cities, they have all these different codes that you need to hit that can really drive costs. The amount of windows you have to have, the type of roofing you have to have. So you really just, if you're going to go into a build, whether it's a tear down or a custom rural, you know, I always tell people I would highly suggest you use someone who's got experience in those areas, because otherwise there's just a lot of pitfalls to not only pricing, but to scheduling and the way the houses come together. That is just, tough when you're doing your first one or
And
first handful.
I would have to imagine that kind of plays into why you said you can't do both. At least you can't do them both well. Um, talk to that a little bit. Was there a bit of an overlap there where you were trying to do both at the same time? There were some struggles and you had to eventually kind of cut the cord. Like, touch on that difficulty of trying to do both at the same time and why you eventually chose to stop.
Yeah, there's definitely some difficulty. I mean, one of the things is subs, right? So you have your trade partners, and if you're having them build at 150 a square foot over here, and then they're building at 250 a square foot over here, it's really tough to try to figure out how to make that work. And so, if you want to find subs that can build these high quality, high end custom homes, and then you also want to compete on price in these, production homes where you have to hit a certain price point, it's really hard to have one foot in each. There are a few companies in the city that do both, but what I found is they have completely separate LLCs, and they're using a fully separate. They might have a few sub overlaps, but for the most part, it's like fully separate, and that makes sense to me. If you're going to do it, it just almost has to be a completely different business model, and so that's why we made the decision to go this route, and also the process and everything too. Everything's just a lot different. So if you're going to be an expert in the teardown space or the rural space, you got to get your reps, and everyone's only got so much bandwidth. So in the end, we kind of made the focus to do those. And also, when I say custom, it doesn't just, I mean, even in community, it can still be custom, right? You're building something you haven't built before, or you're taking one of your plans and making a ton of changes and a ton of customizations rather than, hey, here's the model, we're building that, we're making these 10 changes, and this is your price. It's a much more in-depth planning process. Like the whole sales process with the buyer is just much more in-depth. I mean, sometimes we can put them together in 3 months, sometimes they take 9 months. It just depends. But that's not, when you're doing a model and you're building off that, you can get those contracts together in, 3 weeks. So it's just a much different process from front to back, really in all aspects.
I recently had a guy on who's got $50 million home services business, and he started with roofing, residential, and he said the exact same thing. Whereas they started to expand into commercial, they created a whole new LLC because of that exact reason you just stated. The operations are different. How they pay out commissions to salespeople is different. And then they did the same thing for construction, gutters. And his advice to really anybody was, hey, if you have a business that the operations are completely different, make sure you have separate LLCs, separate bank accounts. The bank account one, you can start to then sort of pressure test the profitability individually as opposed to those profits then getting mixed together and you don't know, okay, well, we made money. Well, would you have made more money on if you just focused on this one versus that one? So love
Yeah,
that advice there. And it's the second time to come up on this podcast. Let's
I think
talk.
that's great. That's great advice from that guy. And we're already thinking in the future about different, branches of the company that we could start. We've already started a separate development branch of the company and all the same reasons. Yep. I
And
agree with that
and
completely.
that's not to say you can't sort of leverage the brand name of Chris George, right? You can have the Chris George companies with Chris George rural. I struggle with that words. Rural homes. So like he has DT companies and then DT roofing and then all the other sort of subsidiaries underneath that. Let's talk about the customer experience. My parents built a home, and it's a kind of a similar thing. Rural home out there with a couple acres, and their experience was not very ideal. Very long process. They ended up kind of taking over a lot of the GC work themselves. Fortunately, my dad's an architect, so he knows how to do all that stuff. But just
Mhm.
talk to me about the customer experience and how you try to give your customers peace of mind in this process where they're putting up a substantial amount of money, sometimes sort of it's the biggest investment people have in their lives. How do you help customers feel safe and secure in that process, especially when it can be a multi-year process?
Yeah, I think it starts with the sales process. I'm always tweaking. I'm always trying to figure out ways to do it better. That's actually something that's on our Q2 list. I got a few ideas for how to improve our sales process. But, I think there's so much education that has to happen in the sales process. And so what we try to do is do a lot of education up to the point of what we call a pre-contract or pre-construction agreement. And then we put that agreement together based on everything we've learned about the customer. So we have like a questionnaire, kind of a feasibility questionnaire is kind of step one. It's like, okay, answer these questions, and then we can figure out, is this project feasible? If it's feasible, if it looks like it's a good fit for us, then, we would schedule an in-person meeting, answer a bunch of questions, walk them through our process, show them what the end game is going to look like. Here's what a pre-contract looks like, pre-construction agreement, and then here's what the end game looks like. So they can see how we get from point A to point B. In educating people on allowances, you're going to have this long list of allowances in the pre-contract. There's going to be a long list of allowances, even longer in the contract and the specs agreement. And you want to make sure they have an idea of what that means. So we try to take someone through a house and say, hey, we're going to base your allowances roughly off what you're seeing at this house. So even if it's a different floor plan, you know what $8,000 of plumbing fixtures looks like. You know what $11,000 of light fixtures looks like. Because otherwise they're just numbers on a paper. And so I think a lot of it is education and walking people through it. Some people are building their second or third house that sometimes they're building their second house with us. And sometimes they built two other houses and maybe it hasn't gone so well. So you have to just understand like what's the motivation, like what are they wanting in this process and what are the most important things to them because it's not always the same. Certainly price is a big one for people, but peace of mind is like probably second. They don't want to stress about it. Most of the people we build for are busy and they got kids and they got demanding jobs. And so, you want to do the education up front. And then once you get it to contract, you want to be clear, this is what you're getting. And there's going to be deviations. There's going to be change orders. Here's how the prices can change. There's only a couple ways. I won't go into that right now, but we're a fixed price builder. So other than these three ways, there's no way that your contract will change prices. Any price changes I get from vendors between now and the close of contract, that's for me to work out. You don't have to worry about that. We've done some cost plus too, but I find there's just so much less stress on the part of a buyer with a fixed cost, and that's what we prefer to do. And then it's from then, once you start, you do that project kickoff meeting. You got your selections coordinator there, you got your project manager there, the superintendent there, and myself. And we're just we're going through everything. We're going through communication. What's that going to look like? What do change orders look like? Where do they get uploaded? How do you use Builder Trend? Where do you find your documents in Builder Trend? And so we try to lay it all out for them. We give them documents and everything and walk them through all that. And then from there, it's communication. It's here's your on-site meetings. Here's how we communicate on a day-to-day basis. You can always do additional on-site meetings by request, no problem. And here is you're going to get a weekly update every week coming on Friday. It's going to come from Builder Trend and it's going to into your email and it's going to say, here's what we did last week. Here's what we're doing next week. Here's the change orders that we've uploaded this week. Here's the ones that have been signed. Here's the ones that need to be signed still. And here's the change orders we're still working on. And that way it's keeping everyone on the same page. So if the buyer looks at it and goes, well, I asked about, enlarging my patio last week. I don't see that on your running list. Okay, perfect. Let's make sure we don't lose track of that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, I think it's all about communication and expectations.
Mm-hmm. Expectations, communication, education, all the Asians that are out there.
Oh,
Yeah,
the
I
only
think.
other one,
Go ahead.
sorry, the other one that comes to mind is when there is a mistake made. I always tell people there's gonna be a mistake made. There'll be at least one, and there'll be some that you don't see. But when there are mistakes made, the test of a builder is not to build a perfect house with zero mistakes. I mean, I think that's almost just pie in the sky, though we're always, trying to get there with quality control lists and that kind of stuff. But how does your builder manage that mistake? They don't pass the cost on to you. They fix it in a timely manner. They make you feel heard. Those kind of things are incredibly important.
Which goes back to expectations, right? Setting the expectation that there will be mistakes and then providing the education on how those mistakes are overcome. That's great. You mentioned builder trend there, and I think if you could expand a little bit more on just the technology side of things and how you are communicating with them, and how you're using kind of technology to give them that peace of mind of where the project is at in sort of the timeline. How do you guys handle that?
Yeah, so this is something we focused on a lot in the last couple of years. We've been with Builder Trend forever. We were definitely an early adopter. But I'll say until about 5 years ago, we were guilty of underutilizing the system. And so we have expanded what we use Builder Trend for massively in the last 5 years and continue to do so. And we've reaped a lot of benefits from it, a lot of efficiencies. But in terms of the customer experience, they actually rolled out a beta test last fall, and we were part of the beta group to test their AI updates. So what happens is our supers are putting in these, and our project managers, they're putting in these daily logs and they're taking pictures and they're putting in these logs saying what's happening next. They're filling in their schedules saying, yep, this is done. This is scheduled for next week. All these different inputs that we're putting in, change orders. So what it does is it takes all those inputs for that job from that week and it puts it into one AI update. Now our guys know you got to manually look through that. You got to add a few things. You're going to have to edit a few things. Like some things, it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. And it saves them a lot of time because before they were doing those email updates manually and it was taking, a lot of times we have them do them on our spec houses too. So, they'll have to send out, 7 of those every week, each one of them. And so it's been great. I mean, that part has been really great to let that buyer's going to get all those pictures that got taken. They're going to come in that update so they can see exactly what's happening. Oh, the drywall's hanging this week. Some of them drop by the house all the time, but some of them are too busy and may only get by every couple of weeks. So yeah, we found that to be incredibly beneficial.
That's awesome. I didn't know about that update. That yeah, I'm sure there'll be a lot of ways AI will enhance that customer experience. Obviously, our focus is on the trade partner relationship. So let's talk a little
Yeah.
bit about trade partners. And just in general, when you're looking at the thousands of trade partners and subcontractors that are out there, what are you looking for? And as a trade partner, what can people do to set themselves apart, and be more likely to be accepted or have their bid accepted?
So this is a conversation that we just had today at our production meeting. Actually, we bring in all of our team. I think we have 18 employees, and we bring in our whole field team to have a meeting every Tuesday. And, some of the things we talk about is sub performance, our trade partner performance. Who is struggling? What are they struggling with? How do we need to coach them to, help them improve? And then if they can't, it's almost a performance, review plan. It's like if you can't meet these standards, then we got to look elsewhere. And so, we are not a builder that is going to shop and just go to the lowest, price on every job. Like that's just not not at all a formula for success. We want to keep these long-standing relationships, but also, hold them to a high standard. And sometimes that can be tough. I mean, if you've been doing it one way for 15 years with somebody and you want to implement some new quality control things that you want them to do, hey, I want you to input this into Builder Trend. I want you to do your estimate through Builder Trend. All these different things that we've been changing. You'll find that some of them, even if they're good at some things, they're just going to say, I'm busy. I really don't want to do this stuff. And you got a hard decision to make at that point. But, for the most part, we have we have two of most of our subs, not all, but two of most of our subs. And they're trusted partners that we've worked for, some of them we worked with for 2 or 3 years, and some of them we've worked with for 35, 40 years. Our one of our HVAC companies we've been with for 40 years. Our plumbing company, I think my dad actually helped him get started, and we've been with them for 40 years. And those are important relationships to us because they know, what we want to, they know what we expect. And, so whenever you switch out a sub, you got to have your antennas up and you got to do your research. I will say, we're in a local builder group. And so that's a good resource to kind of figure out, hey, who's had experience with this company? What kind of experience did you have? But in terms of what I'm looking for communication. So, we understand your schedules change just like ours do. You got to communicate it to us. We can't just show up to the job site and see that you didn't show up yesterday. And then ability to admit to a mistake. I think that might be number one. I mean, we have parted ways with subs where it's just like it's clear as day they messed something up and they want to point the finger at somebody else rather than just saying, "Hey, I screwed that up. I'll be back. I'll fix it." And that's just it's just like our people we hire. Like I have to have people who can take constructive criticism. I have to be able to take constructive criticism from buyers and stuff like that. How otherwise, like how the hell how do you improve? If you can't take criticism. So I think those are probably the main things that separate a good trade partner from one that's just going to give you headaches.
If we turn that around, the same thing applies on your side, right? As the general contractor, you want to be a quality general contractor that trade partners want to work with, and that includes all the things you mentioned there: communicating well, being able to accept when you made a mistake. Talk to that a little bit about how the importance of being a good general contractor and how that gives you a good reputation and the ability to attract good subcontractors.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things there. Definitely, like you said, communication and making sure jobs are ready when the subs show up. We'll get those calls sometimes. Hey, I had a photographer. You wouldn't think a photographer was like really much of a, like an integral trade partner in a building company, but he showed up and the job wasn't ready for him to shoot. And it was the second time in like 6 houses that this had happened. And he was, upset about it. And we had to have a talk with our guys about it. Just, hey, we got to respect his time and make sure that these houses are ready for him when he shows up. And it's the same with all of those trades. If they show up and it's half baked, they're going to be, upset. And so that's a big one, making sure stuff's ready, making sure if schedule does get changed, that you communicate it and admitting to mistakes. So if there is a mistake made, a lot of times in construction, it can kind of be, well, it's kind of our fault. It's kind of their fault. I mean, there's a lot of those kind of gray areas. And so the subs, what I look at it is like when I have to have one of those conversations with our vendors or one of our project managers does, I want the sub who's going to say, okay, what do we need to get done here? And let's figure out how to get there as a team. Maybe I eat something, you eat something, and we try to just get it to the end game that we both can live with versus, someone who's just going to try to point the finger and say, oh, that wasn't my fault. But conversely, if it is our fault, then we call them and say, hey, we're going to pay you for this. You had the wrong information or whatever might have happened. Go out there, we'll take care of it. Sorry about that. So you got to be able to put your hand up if you're going to hold, them to a high standard. You got to be able to admit when maybe you fell a little bit short.
Amen. Very wise advice. I think we'll kind of wrap it up there. Summary of the episode: provide good education, be accountable, set expectations properly. Chris, where do you see what's the future look like? What is kind of the roadmap ahead? Obviously, you've got some youngsters coming into the business. Where do you see the future of Chris George Custom Homes going?
Well, we're growing a lot. I think over the last year, I feel like my brother and I have become professional interviewers. We've made a lot of new hires with our growth, and we got some really great people in place. So I'm really excited about that. We have just started a director of construction, which is a position we never had. Did that internally. We looked externally, decided on an internal hire. We kind of figured he might be the fit anyway, but we wanted to see what was out there. And then we hired a project manager that starts next Monday and a new selections coordinator. I mean, just so many new hires that are really great fits so far. So that's been great. But I think we're also working on an 80-acre development out here. The land I'm sitting on now, where my mom and dad's house is. So we're going to renovate that house and then build another 60 houses around there. So we're really excited about that. It's going to be it's 165th and Plum over the park. It's going to be a big, legacy project. We purchased the land from my mom. My dad always knew at some point this land would get developed. So that's a big part of our next, 3 years probably, getting that all built out. And then other than that, I mean, I just want us to be able to capitalize on any opportunities that come our way. So we do some development. We're developing some land in Spring Hill where we're just selling lots, but we're not, we own the land, we're selling lots. So I want to see that continue to grow. That was kind of a legacy project my dad started 20 years ago. It's a big plat of land. So I want to see our development wing continue to grow and focus on custom homes and really just grow and try to, my big thing is just, I want to maintain, and grow and expand on the reputation that my dad built. And I know my brother's the same way, just really important to us. I always tell our buyers, we're not perfect. We understand that, but I'll be damned if we're not going to, do our best to try to do what's right and, always be upfront and honest and get stuff done as quickly as we can and, end up with happy customers.
It's beautiful. Speaking of that, where can people find you? Whether it's customers, trade partners, people looking for jobs, where can they find you and who do you want reaching out?
Yeah, so our website, chrisgeorgecustomhomes.com. There's a contact us form on there. That's great. Goes right to me and my brother. There is our Instagram's a great place, Facebook, a great place to follow us if you want to see, videos and content on what we're doing. That's, got 3 or 4 posts going a week on there. I think we're up to about 4,000 followers on there. So that's something where you can see, kind of up to date stuff. We're probably better about keeping that up to date than our website, like in terms of inventory and stuff. And so that's definitely a great place to, you can reach out there too. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.